Welcome, friends. Good evening from wherever you are joining us. We are delighted you are taking time to be with us this evening for our Classical PE webinar. I am Joylyn Blake, and I am the director of Scholé Academy. Let me please take the moment to introduce you more fully to our wonderful guests, Angelique and Ron. I'm so glad that you're with us tonight. For those of you who have had familiarity with us, you may have seen Angelique's face. She has been a staple in our Center for Students with Learning Differences in our courses, but let me tell you a little bit about her if you have not yet got to know her yet. She holds a master's degree in special education and a bachelor's degree in psychology. Now, she has had initial interest in physical therapy, neuropsychology, and then she found her way to special education. If you get to know her a little bit better, you get to hear the wonderful parts of her biography that led her on this pathway. But for the past 20 plus years, Angelique has pioneered a method of blending standardized assessments to identify the underlying causes of learning difficulties and then using individualized movement protocols to improve learning. She guides parents and teachers in how to modify the learning environment and their instruction to the students' individual needs. She's provided training for schools, parents, and hospitals. She firmly believes in teaching students to use their strengths to enjoy and not fear the learning process. This year, Angelique celebrates her 21 years of marriage to her wonderful husband, and she homeschools her two fantastic boys. So she's the all-around lady, and we're so happy to have you here, Angelique. Is there anything I covered right now in your bio that anything that I missed that you want maybe to mention about your bio before we get into tonight's content?
I think you pretty much covered it, but I'm sure we'll have lots of fun things to talk about.
Indeed. Yeah. I'll say one more thing. Angelique is teaching, as I said, courses at Scholé Academy. So after tonight's discussion, just be on the lookout for her Reading Foundations courses. She teaches Reading Foundations 1, 2, and 3. And yes, that is a pull-up bar that she has on her required course materials. And she's teaching a new course for us, Reading, Reasoning, and Rhythm. It's kind of a pre-logic course. And so these are really great opportunities that I invite you to check out. So welcome, Angelique. And then our other guest, who is a friend of Angelique's, and they kind of geek out together over classical PE, this is Ron Jones. And Ron holds degrees in kinesiology, in sport and exercise psychology, in physical education, and in English. He also has credentials in a multitude of fitness and wellness techniques. Ron brings this extensive background to his current focus as a historical kinesiologist, sharing widely about the historical understandings of how a healthy body aligns and operates. He teaches simple methods that can be used daily to promote alignment, vestibular development, he'll probably define that later, vestibular development, health, and whole brain integration through activities that are engaging and fun for people of all ages. Ron has spent 15 years as a corporate wellness consultant, and he's taught health and PE from pre-K all the way through the college levels. So welcome, Ron. He's the founder of the Lean Berets. We're so happy that you're here with us, Ron.
Thank you, Dr. Blake. A wonderful intro there, and it's a pleasure to be here with the homeschool crowd, which I have found through my talking to Angelique like 10 years or so that they're quite enthusiastic, so and very passionate about what they do.
Indeed. And you know, Ron and Angelique, I think you can both attest to the fact that homeschoolers, that's on the rise. Homeschooling is on the rise. The classical renewal and educating classically is on the rise, but it's still relatively, that renewal is still relatively new. And I think the renewal has emphasized, rightly so, certain approach to academics, but now it's even shifting, or not shifting, but widening that influence to even recognize like there's more than just academics, it's a whole body approach, and that there's a way that we can physically educate classically. So that's the very first question I want to toss your way. I'm going to toss it to Ron first to say, Ron, tell me a little bit about it. The title of this is Classical PE. So what is classical PE, and maybe differentiate it from modern PE?
Great question, and very loaded question. We only have an hour and a half. We could spend like 10 years on it. But if you distill it down, it really goes back to ancient Greece. And I know the homeschooling crowd is big on classical education and emphasizing Latin and Greek and literature and all these things. But if you go back to ancient Greece, about 50% of their education was built upon the physical. So if you went to your traditional schools and you said, hey, I got this great idea from homeschooling, we need to make the curriculum 50% physical. That way we can achieve excellence. What do you think would happen? And it sounds kind of outrageous today, but basically that's the path. You have to go through the physical to get to the enlightenment, to get to the higher level culture. I'm originally from California, so in the late 1800s, they were talking about making physical education about 30% of their curriculum. So in traditional school settings, we're down to almost nothing. But if you look at the design of it, it had three, if we simplify this, we had about three content areas, major content areas. The first was called restorative arts. And if you think about like old school posture, ergonomics, how to realign the body, basically how to restore the body to a natural state, that's super important, the foundation. The physical literacy. I don't know how much you talk about physical literacy. We talk about literacy a lot, but we also have physical literacy. You know, do your children know the ABCs of movement? Because that, as we know as educators and parents that homeschool, it's sequential and it's foundational, and you build this upon this concept and you build that upon this. And so you learn your ABCs, and then you learn phrases and sentences and spelling. And so I've worked with year-round athletes that don't know the ABCs of movement. They know a sport movement, but in general, they don't. The restorative arts is the first content area. Interestingly, and very pertinent to today, and I will spend some time talking about this, is martial for self-defense and national defense. Every child has a right to defend themselves and learn how to do it. And that is a classical idea, and I still teach that in elementary school. There's a very special way to do it, and I kind of have developed my own way of handling it. It's mostly based on situational awareness, but I actually do some self-defense too. The third content area is pedagogy. And so that would include your philosophy, recreation, dance, sports, games, things like that. Traditional, well, non-traditional PE, current PE, you have remnants of pedagogy. You have a lot of sports and games, and that's about it. And so when I teach PE, I touch on all three of those content areas. And I don't teach a sport-based PE program. I do a few sports skills just for neurological development and digital dexterity, how to learn your hands and fingers, how to use your eyes for visual tracking and things like that, because catching and throwing is important for motor development and neurological development. And Angelique can go deeper into that. But I don't do sports per se in my PE program. I just don't. If you learn how to move well and you're physically literate, you can become a better athlete. And I've been an athlete my whole life and highly competitive in ultra endurance cycling and running. But you need the chops. You know, if you want to compete at the highest level as an athlete, you need overall good foundational movement skills. I work with the LA Dodgers when they won the World Series in 2020. And I work with all their strength and conditioning coaches. And I learned a lot working with them, because one of the things they mentioned was that the older strength coaches that had been around like over a decade, they said, you know, the people coming into pro baseball today had the same amount of wear and tear in their bodies at 19 or 20 as the men did leaving pro baseball did about 10 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, in their late 20s, early 30s. And we talked about why, and it was sports specialization, year-round sports, a lack of proper physical education. And basically they brought me into like, what are the classical methods to restore the body so we can maintain the arms of our multi-million-dollar athletes and they stay in the roster. And to their benefit, I think this is really important for your crowd to hear. They wanted to know the philosophy behind all of it, and they were really interested in the mental stability part. Because if you look at classical PE, it's very focused on survival skills, but at the top of all that, um, I learned, and working with one of my, I think Shane Hilton's on the from North Dakota. He's on the chat tonight. We were looking at all this, like it's so focused on mental stability, and so that's the real value of classical PE as an approach. There's a lot of mental stability involved, and that's a huge issue today with children. I've worked with people in the military. I've had a lot of contact with military people, and they're talking to me about a need for more mental stability. So, in a nutshell, that's the difference. I don't throw the ball out. It's not that kind of PE. It's a lot of work, actually. If you want to be a quality physical educator, you got to hustle. And my kids are like, Coach Jones, you're never on your phone. I'm like, I don't have time to be on my phone. Like I'm teaching and I'm monitoring and I'm assessing, and it's work, but they enjoy it, and we'll get more into the psychology of that as we go along. I hope that. Are there any questions on that, or do you want me to expand somewhere? Or
Well,
Angelique, do you have
guess
anything
who
to add?
you have already provoked me to want to go a little bit off script here, and that is because you noted that sports is not the central and the primary player to the education you're offering, and I think that this maybe really resonates with homeschoolers of various sorts. Plenty of homeschoolers have their kids maybe in sports or with the co-op or with the local school, but then there's plenty of us who don't. We were raising band geeks or library nerds or all kinds of, or great musicians or language experts. But tell me a little bit about, even if your child doesn't play sports, what's the importance of being physically educated? And then definitely we will go to you, Angelique, next. But tell me a little bit about that, Ron.
Uh, that's another. These are great things to discuss with people that actually want to listen and think about this. Well, let's do this. If you think about how many people will play sports after high school or college, most of them will not. They might go run a 10K or a 5K or something like that. But a lot of sports are team based. Well, it's hard to find a team as an adult. And so you're really doing people a disservice. If your PE program is based on sports, it's very impractical. And a lot of children today are very overweight and they're physically illiterate. They're not comfortable with their bodies in motion. A lot of the children I work with, and because I'm in rural Oklahoma, I'm in the Tulsa area, but out in the country, um, they're very poor. They don't have money to do sport programs. And one of the guys I teach with, speech therapist, he was telling me his granddaughter's in softball, and like the bats cost hundreds of dollars a piece. And I mean, there's like, a few $1,000s in her backpack for softball. I mean, a lot of people don't have the kind of money. So, um, learning how to move well is really essential if you want to go through life and not live in chronic pain and develop chronic diseases. Um, I came out as a consultant. I worked for oil and gas companies. So it basically was like physical education and corporate wellness. And I worked with environmental health and safety to help prevent OSHA recordable injuries. And when I started looking at the injuries with the oil company, whether it was on a rig or in the field or even in the office, so much of it was related to improper movement patterns or things they never learned how to do in the first place, or tightness in their body so they couldn't get in the right position to do the work that they needed to do, or even things in the office, because we had injuries, recordable injuries in the office. So um, it's not just about PE. Here in rural Oklahoma, like I have property, so we've had a lot of actually record rain this spring. all kinds of trees down, and every time we get a windstorm, there's sticks and branches, and like I'm out there with my chainsaw. It's just it's a, it's a lot of physical work. And if your body is out of alignment and you don't have any kinesthetic awareness of where your body position is, how to use your hands, how to use your feet, you're just an injury waiting to happen. And healthcare is difficult today. It's very expensive. It's hard to find physicians that have appointment space, and your crowd is probably into self-managing a lot of that at home with their own remedies and preventative measures and like. But still, every once in a while you have to go to the doctor for something. Um, yeah, it's a really good question. It's not just about can I help your child become a better athlete? Well, the answer is yes, but it's really not just about sports because um, sports has a pretty short shelf life. I raced into the masters area because I was in cycling, and so I was doing solo stuff and also some team stuff, but that a team was like four people relay. We did the race across America a few times. So um, I was able to do that into my later years, but most people won't have that opportunity.
Such a good view for long-term vision. And even as you said, creating the fortitude, the mental fortitude that comes with bodily proficiency. Now I'm going to go to Angelique because Angelique, degrees in special education and psychology. I want to know, what was it that kind of inspired or provoked your passion for physical education as well? Whether positive or negative, how did you get interested in this topic?
Okay, so I left the school districts in 2004 and went into the private practice world under a neuropsychologist at first, and then continued on my own. I had my own clinic up until COVID, and I cross-trained into, well, let me back up. I was one of those highly trained educators, and my students that I was working with at my kitchen table to start weren't getting out of special ed. So I went back to the research literature and realized even with these amazing academic interventions, most children never made it out of special ed. Well, when I had been working with the neuropsychologist, he was using stroke rehab, which had also been found to improve learning issues. So I started cross-training and rabbit trailing. One thing led to another, started making friends with all of the different therapists in my area, speech paths, OT, physical therapists, any kind of neural rehab stuff, and kept training. And then one day, this video that Ron put out called The Renaissance, and I show it to all my classes. Everybody has to watch it. I realized all of these things that we were doing in the rehab world on the back end to help kids who had been diagnosed with learning problems was initially in the schools to begin with. We were using it in education when classical ed was still just education to prevent learning problems. And it was done across cultures for millennia. So when I saw that video, fireworks went off, and I was like, you mean we were already doing this? Like the stuff that we're just doing with the kids with the most severe deficits. And the kids that I worked with in my clinic were the ones who didn't qualify for services through the school district, or homeschoolers who didn't want to access those services through the school district, or couldn't quite meet the criteria for insurance-based services or something like that. So there was still a problem. They still needed help. And then to realize all of these students at one time had access to this type of body training. Everything that I trained in had a ton of research behind it. And I had a class with Classical U this summer for private school teachers and moms too. But we went through some of the research, and typically in anywhere from 6 weeks to 1 school year's time of a movement-based therapy being implemented, nothing academic was changed. You would see kids go from the lowest reading scores in the county to the highest reading scores. We would see behavior issues cut in half, if not more than that. Academics on average There's high and low that you have to throw out, but on average would improve over a year's time. What they would get 2 years academic gain. So knowing what we were doing, all the timing in the cerebellum, all the coordination, everything that has to go back and forth through the primary motor strip in the brain. So anything we do motor-wise makes the brain more efficient. Reflexes, all kinds of things are so important to learning in academics, but it's also really important to emotional well-being, to the mental strength and stability that Ron was talking about. And we see these, in the school systems are just melting down. And to realize if we would just put these pieces back, we could have such incredible gain in one school year's time. And so then our homeschoolers, one of the main questions I would get, we'd have new homeschoolers and they would come and say, well, what do we do about PE? I've got my Latin curriculum and I've got my logic and all this, these different wonderful things. And we've got our read aloud revival and all this, but what do we do for PE? And so I feel like this is a major area. I've been shouting from the rooftops for at least a decade now that we've got to get families trained in skilled movement and how to put these pieces back into place.
I
Well,
just typed a note in your, sorry. Crawling is a cross lateral pattern. So you have like one part of your body diagonally moving forward and the other limb moving forward on the other side, and it connects the right and left hemisphere. And I remember like over 25 years ago, my mentor teacher saying, oh, well, when I taught high school English and the kids couldn't read very well, or they were struggling, I'd have them crawl across the room and then they come back and then they'd start reading. I'm like, what? And so it took me a long time to realize neurologically what that meant. But Bonnie Pruden was doing this, amazing lady in the history of physical fitness and physical education in the 1950s and 60s. And she actually went around and did demonstrations with optometrists with certain pieces of equipment and crawling patterns to enhance reading. And so when Angelique is saying, like, a lot of this stuff has been around a long time, but we're just now kind of waking up to, hey, this doesn't go out of date. It's just, it went out of favor, but it's classical. This is the thing. Like, classical is forever important. It doesn't go out of practicability. It just goes out of favor with people.
I know that you've already activated so much fascination with what have we forgotten or never learned or never heard that is just kind of a basic game changer. So, Ron, I want to ask you too, because I know you also emphasize, you mentioned the self-defense, but as I understand it from the little exposure I've had to your work, you also emphasize on the ground training and off the ground training. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that comes from the classical design. If you look at the old drawings and photographs from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the classical era of PE was about 1885 to 1920. And there were remnants of it still around, like I'm still doing parts of it, but that's kind of the heyday of it. So you look at the old photos. I remember when I first started seeing the pictures, like I didn't understand them. There's all this stuff that looked like a circus, like there's these ropes hanging down and ladders from the ceiling and all these vaults, like a gymnastics place to train for the Olympics or something. But it was orthopedic. It was orthopedic gymnastics. They use a lot of gravity training. This goes back to ancient Greece, and Hippocrates used gravity for health purposes. He would hang people upside down from a ladder type of apparatus, and it was called succussion, and they would like vibrate people and shake them a little bit, and it elongated joint space, and there was lymphatic drainage things going on. That all goes back to Hippocrates. So basically, gravity, when you get off the ground, and I was taught by one of my mentors that it molds your body like clay. It's the quickest way to reset postural deformities. There was a guy named Dr. Robert Martin in the 60s, and the inversion table, that's what I was thinking. He was a corporate physician for American Airlines, and he also wrote a lot of articles for like muscle magazines and bodybuilding and stuff. He's a really smart guy. He invented the inversion table, and he healed people with gravity. He's got some amazing books from like the 70s about gravity training. And I mean, there are stories about people like going into his office in a wheelchair and they're able to walk after they saw him. And so it's a really deep area to study and a huge part of classical PE history and classical education history. But it's also a survival skill. We saw in Texas, when you see people in floods, we heard stories about people up in the trees hanging on literally for their lives for hours, or trying to pull people out. And you're pulling people out through the air, dealing with gravitational force. So it's a big deal. A lot of the kids today don't have the grip strength or the weight the strength in their hands and fingers and arms to support the weight that they are, to hang in a bar for 1 second. And so you have to scale that, and there's a way to do it. But um, I start with just hanging on a straight bar. We have some geometric discs on our playground. They're like half circles, and there's spaces, and the kids can kind of weave through there like snakes. And I really encourage them just to go play in the monkey bar stuff. But if you have access to a park, or like homeschooling parents are they're pretty hands-on, I've noticed, with like building stuff, and we call that in labor engineering. If you look at the history back in World War II, they built a lot of their apparatus. Parents, you can there's a whole world on labor engineering. You can make your own monkey bars, make your own pull-up bars. I've done some of that stuff. And so just letting your kids go out and play with gravity is so good for them. Their shoulder development, their spatial awareness. Because if you're just doing this, and this is a true story, fourth grade student I had in California, 100 hours a week in a video game. So if you're doing this 100 hours a week, like where's your spatial awareness? Oh, it's really good so you can be a fighter pilot. No, that doesn't work that way. You're not going to be a fighter pilot by just doing that. Maybe you can run a drone, but not the real thing. So that's why it's important. It goes all the way back to Hippocrates. It molds your body like clay. It's also directly related to survival skills.
And as I said at the opening, Angelique requires a pull up bar for her reading classes. I think Ron has kind of indicated the reason for that. But Angelique, do you want to say anything more about some of the observations Ron's made and maybe things you've seen in students as a result of these techniques?
Absolutely. So one of the reasons I require the pull-up bar is we can't. There's like 1,000 reasons. It's very important that the spine is straight. If we are twisted and turned, we have pressure on nerves, and then there's information that is not getting through correctly. The shoulder girdle most elementary teachers will tell you this, the shoulder girdle needs to be strengthened, and it needs to be level in order to be able to write. And of course, you've all seen the memes about how many pounds of pressure are being put on the body when we lean our head further and further forward. So asking the kids to be able to just hang and support their body weight and begin to strengthen their shoulder girdle and straighten out their spine is huge. But at the same time, very often when I have, working in the CSLD, when I have families come and say, this one subject is so hard and we have behavior issues around this subject, I always suggest proprioceptive input, and I'll explain that, before the most difficult subject. So this is putting pressure into the joints and the muscles, because it is very calming to the nervous system, and it helps kids focus and attend to what they are doing. So even my boys growing up, when I knew the most difficult subject we were going to have during the day, we did PE at home right before that. We went outside, we did some pull-ups on the climbing dome, maybe just hung, we ran, whatever, push-ups, chair dips. Even in my in-person classes, I'm the only one in our homeschool co-op that starts with PE, but everybody comes in ready for academics and memory work. And I say, we're going to take the first 10 minutes and we're going to do some chair dips and some push-ups. And I have dowel rods. I learned that from Ron, to how to keep their body in correct alignment. And over the course of the school year, it's really incredible. So the change that we see in their bodies and their ability to attend to the work that we're doing. And I keep balance boards scattered around the classroom. And they know if they're having a hard time attending, they get up and they go stand on a balance board, because balance It causes a chemical wash to go over the brain. It engages the cerebellum and helps them focus and attend. There's so many things that are just so important about this. If we started our days every day with this type of PE where we are bringing order to the body instead of just strengthening like our arm for throwing a ball, our academics would see such huge improvement. I've also seen incredible improvements for behavior. I kind of got a reputation in our homeschool community, and so any kids that were having some trouble, they would give to me, and we would just do PE, and we would see amazing changes. Behavior would improve. I wouldn't have the difficulties that they were seeing other places just because of that.
To support what Angelique is saying, ancient Greece, when I started teaching pre-K and kindergartners before I moved to Oklahoma, I'm like, oh my gosh, like what am I had 50 kindergartners at one time, 55-year-olds. That you find out how good of coach you are when you have 55-year-olds at the same time in one PE aid. You find out what you're made out of. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've really got to get down to the basics here because I don't want to just like play silly games with them. And so if you dig down in ancient Greece, you'll find that their two main focus areas were rhythm and balance. And so I started with a little drill called Find Your Center. And I thought I was like creating it myself based on all this reading and stuff. And then I found one of my old books from like 100 years ago. They had almost like the same identical thing that they were doing. It's like I was kind of deflated, but it's like at least I'm on the right track. So what Angelique is saying is classically based. And it's super important. Like you asked, well, what's the importance of PE, like for your whole life? Well, life is about rhythm in a lot of ways, and a lot of people are completely out of sync. I can look at how they walk across the parking lot and tell you if the rhythm and synchronization is there or not. And most people aren't trained to see that, but once you tune in that lens, it's pretty startling. Actually, this goes into situational awareness, self-defense. If you look at the prison studies, and they've interviewed a lot of prisoners, like what is the determining factor for why they choose a certain victim over someone else? It's asymmetrical gait comes up to the top of the list. That means you don't walk well. You're out of balance. You look weak. You look like a victim just based on your poor quality of movement. So it's about situational awareness, self-defense, self-preservation, optimizing your brain for better learning, aesthetics. Dancers have a good sense of posture line, and gymnasts are able to do that. And very high level athletes sometimes have that too.
I think that we have a lot of folks actually asking questions, so I appreciate that we're already getting to some of those. But I just want to give you both an opportunity to give maybe some practical, either exercises, skills, things to do, and or some practical resources to have around the house. I think that you both have already mentioned a few things, but if there's any resources that you could share, whether skill or physical resources that you recommend, we're all ears.
I would definitely say an indoor pull-up bar and a balance board. And if your kids need to stand on the balance board to do school, one of the other things that I talk about, especially in my reading foundations classes, is they do not need to be sitting at the table unless it is a 22-degree slant. And you can get slant boards that you can put on the table. But especially our younger kids, they need to be on their belly to work on the floor, or they need to be standing to work. So whether that's putting craft paper on the wall or a slant board on top of a bookshelf or a dresser and stand on a balance board to work at the slant board. Or you can give them, I've done this in my in-person classes, everybody that needs it is on a balance board and they are working on a clipboard. But when they get wiggly, it's their body telling you they need to move. So get up. Don't ask them to sit there in that chair. You can also, I keep this right by me because I do this all the time. These balance cushions that you can put in their chair. If you do need them sitting, that helps with focus and attention. But come up with all kinds of things to do. And you can find stuff on Ron's YouTube channel about what to do on the pull-up bar. But just being able to support their own weight at first and turn it into like a family competition or something, and cheer each other on when somebody does something they couldn't do before, or they can hang a second longer than they could last week. There's so much fantastic stuff. And in my reading classes and in the new, I'm calling it R cubed because I keep getting the words mixed up. In R cubed and reading foundations, I spend every week, we go into some type of neurological thing, and then we talk about why it's important for academics and for, like in the liberal arts tradition, training the body and tuning the soul. It's absolutely related. If you can't control your body, you can't control your soul. So we go into that, and then I give exercises each week, whether it's strengthening the eyes. And I wanted to define the vestibular system. So it is the inner ear, and it is the gyroscope for the head. It controls balance. So like, if you have an ear infection, your balance may be off, but it also controls the eyes. So for our kids who are missing words and skipping lines when they're reading, I ask for videos, just like Ron said, he can see it when the kids are walking across the parking lot. When I'm doing an intake with the CSLD, I ask for videos. I need to see them walking away from the camera, and then walking to the side so I can see the shoulders. But I also ask for an eye tracking video. And then if there's problems, then we have to go to the next step. Is it a muscular issue around the eyes, or is it something in the vestibular system? So then we get into how is their balance? And that's one of the things we do in my classes is let's stand on one leg and time ourselves and make it a competition. Competition has gotten a bad rap. And if we do it in the right way, it is actually very beneficial. If you're competing with your own scores and you're getting better, and today I'm going to stand on my right leg 2 seconds longer than I did last week, there's nothing wrong with it. It can be very motivating. Okay, Ron.
Something I'll interject real quick is that one of my great friends and mentors in Brain Gym, I don't know if you're familiar with Brain Gym, but they've been in the classroom with learning disabilities for 40 years, I think. And they focus on cross-lateral patterns to enhance full brain integration, basically. But Kathy Brown, who spent over 20 years as an elementary school teacher, she's a Brain Gym consultant now and trainer, but she wrote a book called Educate Your Brain. And I've set up a webpage just for your group here tonight, and I will add that link to her website in that book. She's got some free stuff, but I highly, highly recommend the book. Like if you want to learn from a book that's written for parents, homeschooling children, like this is the book. And she'll go through the brain science, but she makes it really simple so you can understand it. And she has some of the exercises in her book. Like one of them is called the cross crawl, where it's basically you're just reaching across your midline and you're touching your opposite knee, and then you're touching your opposite ankle, and then without looking, you're reaching behind you and touching your opposite heel. That's one of the warm-up drills that I do with PE sometimes, or even my athletes when I'm working with athletes. So, and also on the ergonomic postural stuff, this is something I learned from one of my mentors, Jake Monlux. He's a retired physical therapist. I just talked to him yesterday. He's 95 years old, spent over 40 years in physical therapy on the clinical side, but he came out of classical PE. He went through the YMCA system. He went to the Olympic trials for gymnastics in the 50s. And he said, when you have a flat top desk, and Angelique mentioned the optimal reading and writing angle is 22 degrees. And you can make your own slant tables. There's a link on that webpage that I set up for you, so you can buy one on Amazon. Plastic with a little clip on it that you can put in your backpack, so you can do that too. But when you take a chair away that fits the child properly, because the ideal postural position for your hips is not 90 degrees. It's about 60, like you're on a horse. So even if you're not a horse person, think about how a person sits on a horse. And if you know equestrians at all, they're really good with posture, because the horse is really sensitive to postural shifts in the saddle, and they're trained to sense like that weight distribution changing. So you basically sit like you're on a horse with your knees below your hips, right? And then the slope is set about 22 degrees. And if you don't have that, you have a flat top desk, like, because it's cheaper to buy tables like that at schools. And so what happens, and this is in the video that Angelique mentioned, the Renaissance, you'll see the kids do this and then they'll rotate forward. So I saw a kid like this in my school today. He's walking into the cafeteria and he's got one shoulder up higher. And it's like, I can tell what hand he writes with because he's stuck here and he's twisted forward. And so I learned that. I came back from Seattle, and my son was in 5th grade at the time. Now, mind you, I think I know like a lot of stuff. I've got all these degrees and everything. And I'm like, Kate, I need you to walk down the hallway. And I walk down the hallway, and he's got one shoulder fired. He's rotating. I'm like, oh my, this is my son. How did this happen? So even with me, like, there's so much there that just keeps getting uncovered layer after layer. And Shane will kind of laugh at this because he had the same mentor I did. One of them, we learned a long time ago, Shane and I, your child starts to move worse the very first day they attend public school. And it's because of not just how long they sit, but how they sit. And it really impacts learning in a negative way. There's a very famous study done by Dwight Harmon and published 1949 from Texas. And the only people that talk about it today are zealots like me and Shane, or optometrists. But he spent 9 years, I think, studying 140,000 children at 14 state agencies, and they looked at every conceivable thing in the facility of the classroom, the type of paint, what was the sheen, where are the windows, what type of glass is used, where are the lights, what kind of bulbs did they have, what kind of angles were in the desk. And they found all these things that tied into learning, including dental health and things like this. Anyway, it was probably the most intense study I've ever read in my whole career. It's really hard to get through, but what I recognize, like, we've thrown all of it out the window because schools today don't use any of it. But Angelique is talking about things that they were discovering in the 40s. And actually, I've got a book from 1856 talking about when you're not sitting properly, how it compresses the diaphragm and your organs are out of position and your brain isn't getting the right oxygen. And it's like 1856. It's nothing new. It's out there. You just have to know where to look.
So let me ask this, because parents, have you heard this? I mean, we've already gotten just a deluge of helpful things. Maybe start with PE rather than math. We always hear, start with the most academically challenging thing first when your brain's the freshest. Well, make your brain a little fresher. Start with PE first. The hanging bar, the posture when one sits, the balance boards, the slant boards, all of this. Now I'm thinking of us homeschooling mamas cuddling up on the couch with our kids in the read aloud. Is there anything you'd warn us kind of away from when we're not being conscientiously vigilant about prepping our bodies, but we got the cuddling on the couch? Or is there anything that you would recommend or warn us away from in our day-to-day routines?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of cuddling on the couch with read aloud. And there's days where that's just what you need to do to get through the day. But I would encourage you to also make PE type things. And it doesn't have to be what you think of as PE. So coming from like an OT stance, like, get the kids out and get their feet, get them barefoot and
I was just going to mention feet.
Yeah. Get their feet in some sand or a bucket of beans or something and start moving the feet. But I mean, I tell all my classes barefoot as much as possible, especially barefoot outside where it is safe. Somebody's in the chat saying grounding. We're supposed to discharge all of that built up into the crust of the earth. And then mid 20th century, we put these insulators in the bottom of our shoes. So I have so many kids that are, I can't stand to write this sentence or whatever. There's probably most days, read aloud and cuddle on the couch is absolutely what you should do. But make these types of physical things also how you handle the rough stuff. But there's nothing wrong with cuddling on the couch and reading a book.
Barefoot. Yeah.
So one more follow-up, and then hey, participants, populate that Q&A box with your questions because we want to be sure that they get to those. But of course, if you've been in the wide world and the public sector for a little while, some of you may remember fidget spinners. It was all the rage for a little while. And then also there was all forms of accommodation, put rubber bands around the bottom of the chair, or sit on a bouncy ball, and all kinds of various accommodations during the. All right. So this is what I'm asking you, Angelique. It seems to me that those were ways to, get the wiggles out. But you've been talking about chemical bath for the brain and ways to rebalance and things like that. So tell us a little bit more about maybe misguided ways of dealing with these wiggles or behavioral issues, and then a better way.
Well, it's if you have the big balance balls, like the great big ones, I showed you my little balance cushion, that's fine. But the great big balance balls, just throw them away. And there was such a fad of let's have the like beanbag chairs everywhere. If they need to be sitting, like Ron was talking about, the correct posture with your knees slightly below your hips and your feet need to be flat on the ground. So moms, get those laundry baskets and turn them upside down and put them under the kitchen table where you're doing school. And make sure everybody's hips and knees are in the correct position and that their feet are flat and supported. Try to stand. Definitely just start with PE. Do it in the morning and then do it again after lunch. But stand up against the wall and have everybody feel the back of their head and between their shoulder blades and their hiney against the wall. And this is how we're supposed to be standing. And then step forward and try to remember that. And there's little exercises you can do to help try to correct that and bring that back, because we're all like this, whether we're looking at our phones or our books or our handwriting pages or whatever.
It's actually a classical test, the wall test. You need to take your shoes off, put your heels on the baseboard, but you don't want a baseboard sticking out that far. So ideally you're like right where the wall board comes down, and rock your booty back on the wall and touch your shoulder blades to the wall and just relax, but stand lengthwise and see how far your head is off the wall. That's how far off your fall line you are, your center. And it's amazing. Like I have elementary kids who are 4 or 5 inches off center. Well, from a injury perspective, that's really significant because we're the only animals in the world that walk completely upright. Even an ape doesn't walk completely upright. So you can do a little test at home. You get barefoot, flat floor, no carpet, and just raise your heels like 1/8 of an inch and don't move anything else, and your whole body will start to tip over and you have to catch yourself. So that balance point is really delicate. Well, if you're 4 or 5 inches forward with your head, the whole backside of your body is just chronically tonic, trying to keep you from falling, and that's fatiguing. It's in classical PE terms, it relates to energy reserve. So if your body is really inefficient, no physical literacy, you're working so hard just to walk or just to sit, you're fatigued at the end of the day. You don't have energy reserve to deal with an emergency. There's a forest fire. You've got to get your family out, and it doesn't matter if you're tired or not. There's somebody trying to break your door down. Like, you should have energy reserve just in case there's an emergency. This is part of the classical approach to physically educating people. So I want to toss that in there. Great points.
And I want to say, from a reflex standpoint, walking should not be fatiguing. In the ancient world, people walked everywhere. But it's because of the misalignment in our bodies. And then because of all this misalignment, we can't really partake in what leisure really means, what it should be. So doing these things will make everything else so much better.
So on your page, there's a page that I made for your group tonight, and there's a bunch of links there, some homework for the parents. There's a link there for PE 101 on my YouTube site. And there's a bunch of videos. I actually put this together during the pandemic because I was trying to help homeschoolers and also public school people at home. They didn't know what to do. And a lot of the things that were being thrown at kids were like stupid and really dangerous. I'm like, there's got to be, I've got to be able to help here. So one of the videos I did in that time period was how to walk. I took everything that I've basically ever learned about walking and I put it into about 14 minutes and I demonstrated improper stuff and talked about how to correct that. But that's worth watching. It's on the PE 101 playlist, and the link is there. It'll take you right there. Just scroll down and find it. Some of the videos there are specifically for parents. It'll say like parent message or something like that. And I'm explaining to parents why classical PE is important, why they need to know this, and what is the importance of this, and why the philosophy behind it. So anyway, but the walking one, as Angelique said, and most of my kids don't walk well, they're third, fourth, fifth grade. And I was told by my mentor like years ago, that the mentor that also mentored Shane, that by second grade, 90% of the kids are deformed. 90%. And that's not from birth. That's lifestyle. He was talking about postural deformities. And I'm like, man, that sounds crazy. When then I started teaching and I recognized, actually working with second, third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, he's right. I'm trained to see it. It took me a while to get there, but it's amazing what you see when you start developing that lens. And a lot of that is in the walking video. So you can watch 14 minutes of that, and then you can go to the mall and just start like, doing all these assessments of people, for fun.
I think you have some believers for sure. And so first of all, I'll say to all of our guests and participants, when we send out this recording, we will also send a list of resources and links. So don't worry if you're not catching it all
Yeah.
in the chat. We'll send out the links with the recording. Okay. And then I think, Ron, there's some folks that are asking the generous website or webpage that you've compiled for us. Is that live now, something they could find now, or is that something that will
I
be?
put it in there, and I was afraid to like get off this page for fear it would like lose me or something. But I believe it's the leanberets.com/Scole Academy.
Oh,
And I
okay.
put the link in the chat. I put it in the chat. So maybe one of our producers can just hit that and make sure that that is the link. If not, go to leanberets.com and click events, and there's a link there for Scole. And
You
I've been writing down some things based on interest and conversation that I'll add, but there's already a bunch of stuff there to get you started tonight.
What a gift. What a gift. Now, Angelique, I think you wanted to add something. Did you have something?
So if anybody's read the liberal arts tradition, I've been going through the classical U classes on it. And one of the things they talked about was this very Gnostic idea that we shouldn't worry about the body, that we should only be worrying about our minds and our souls. But we are created as beings with bodies. And I love the phrase that they used in the liberal arts tradition, that train the body, tune the soul, that it's so important. And this stuff was done throughout history, just intuitively and with practice and understanding. Now we have the neuroscience to explain why it works and explain why it's so important. So we'd really love to see just a whole new movement. Like we had the read aloud revival, we had Latin, we had logic instruction. Let's get back to classical PE, because it's just really important.
It is, especially now with the growing technology and the social media, and kids are really suffering, and just from it, you just take the physical part of it, sitting improperly, they're not getting outside enough, and it's really a tragedy. So hopefully this group, yeah, I'm sure they're already doing a lot of stuff. I think homeschoolers, from what I know, they're pretty hands-on with like crafts and working with tools. And by the way, like whenever I do keynote presentations, I always stress working with your hands, doing manual arts, shop classes, wood shop, pottery, even bead making. Somebody's like, "You mean that underwater bead beating joke was like, it was actually for real. It's like, yeah, it wasn't a joke. It actually helps your brain, you know? So all that stuff's important. And it's really one of the ways that I've kept my sanity in the midst of all this turmoil going on in our country and the globe. I'm just outside working with my hands and my body, and I'm sweating. And it's really important.
So we want to hear from you on any suggestions you have for a series of movements. And I'll just click up a few questions as they come in. But this one was from Christina. Anything prior to the lesson for a math teacher that they may do?
Well, the Brain Gym cross crawl pattern in Kathy Brown's book is it's really simple. It just takes a few seconds. I would that and how I explain it to my kids, your brain has two halves. When you move across your midline, it connects the other half of your brain. And so just the crawling motion, walking is a cross lateral pattern. Um, I do a lot of stick stuff with martial arts. So we're working in spirals, figure eights, and circles and going across the midline constantly. And the brain gym drills will do a lot of that. Actually, Kathy has a whole thing with, I don't know if you've done this, Angelique. There's a big thing in brain gym with infinity symbols and figure eights, and just doing this on a whiteboard or tracing it with your finger, or these marble boards that some people have made, and you have a marble that goes around in an eight pattern in a little trough that's routed out. That connects both sides of the brain to optimize learning. The idea is to cross the midline to connect the whole brain, and that's where you're going to learn better. The frontal cortex, the right left hemisphere, especially with traumatized kids. I work with a lot of kids that come from, I mean, some of them pretty desperate situations at home. And when you're in a state of threat like that, you think with your brainstem, the reptilian brain, it's great for survival if you have to fight or flight because you're pumped up and you're adrenalized, but it's not a good place for learning and reflecting. And so just by doing these cross crawl patterns, you can pull people out of that and get the full brain integration. So that would be a real simple tip. There's other things out there, but that's a real simple one to do.
I'd say chair dips. That's something that everybody's already, if they're in math class, they're already at a chair. And I say, we scoot our chair back and we get our hands behind us. And I say, straight line from your nose to your toes. The only thing that bends are your elbows. And so we want to teach them to keep their hiney up, and so that's good proprioceptive input. So it's going to be calming and centering for the nervous system. That's always the last thing we do. I have a whole bunch of different things that we do over the course of about 10 minutes, but then we all go to our seats and do chair dips right before we actually get to work. And it's amazing. But I love the cross crawl stuff. Yes. You can even get them all everybody at a whiteboard, or from the shoulder is super important. Mm-hmm. Moving from the shoulder, put their thumb up. And this is good also for eye tracking.
I think we have some folks who are wondering or maybe envisioning, is this all elementary kids? Does a child outgrow this? We have a mom of a 14-year-old and others, if we feel like, I've waited too late. Does this work for older students?
Absolutely.
The brain gym's been used for professional auto racers.
Yeah,
and I've used it when I've worked with neurosurgeons, and I had them doing it, and they were all over it because they're like, "Oh yeah, full brain, yeah." They like totally got it.
See,
So
it's never too late to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I've done it as an athlete and just as a person that needs to connect before I do something, and yeah.
How about this one? Student with dyscalculia, is there any physical activities or training that can help with some focus and concentration?
What's that condition, Angelique? Do
so
you know? I'm not
this
familiar
has
with
to
that.
do with math and difficulty with numbers. So I come at it from a little different standpoint. I want to know what's behind it. Dyslexia, that's just an umbrella term that means I have trouble with this thing. Dyslexia, even though I've been given good instruction, I have trouble reading. Dyscalculia, I've been given good instruction, but I still have trouble. I can't take advantage of the education I've been given where numbers and math are concerned for some reason. So I want to know what's behind it. Is it in the brain? Is it the eyes? Is it the vestibular system? Is it, if it's the brain, what part of the brain is it? And then I would put together a program specifically to develop that. There's certainly accommodations that can be done. Everybody knows to like use the graph paper for the make 1 digit per square and that kind of thing. But it would be really hard for me to give recommendations at this point without knowing what else is really going on underneath with that child.
Angelique's mentioned vestibular a lot. That's your inner ear. And the children, especially the gamers that sit in one position, they're sitting in school a lot. And then they're sitting like the fourth grader that told me in class, 100 hours a week. It's not uncommon for me to have heard in the last 5, 6, 7 years, mainly, that they're gaming 25, 30, 35 hours on a weekend, 40 hours on a weekend. So when you use it or lose it, right? So if you're not moving your head and all that fluid is moving around in your inner ear canals and there's little cilia hairs in there that move, this is how you're, like if you cover your eyes and you tilt your head and bend over, you won't fall over even though you can't see because you're getting this feedback. There's also feedback on the feet as well, but um, people that don't move their head a lot, when they do move their head, they get really dizzy. And so children have really poor balance today a lot of times because their vestibular system is so detuned. It's not tuned up properly because they sit so much. They go home and sit. They sit at school. They don't have PE in school, and if they do, it's like, they're flopping around doing basically nothing. And that is a problem for self-defense. You don't want to get disoriented if somebody slaps you and you have to do a quick head turn. That's one of the advantages of self-defense training, like real stuff. You're doing a lot of head turns.
I wanted to say something about headphones. What the research that's starting to come out now is these kids that are spending most of their day wearing headphones, the big, like sound canceling headphones and listening to music or audiobooks or whatever. And we love audiobooks and homeschooling, but we are starting to see kids develop auditory processing problems because they can't correctly understand, process the sound and where it's coming from because everything is so controlled in those sound canceling headphones. So they're great for some of the time. Sitting in a well-matched chair and table that fits the child for some time is great, but we need variety. Like Ron said, get outside, be looking over here and back over here and throw a ball to each other and jump rope and do sidewalk chalk. But it's absolutely not just the little ones. I mean, if you think about, most of my initial training was in stroke rehab. Okay, well, that's people in their 70s and 80s and even 90s and who are regaining the ability to walk. The brain is incredibly plastic. That means changeable. So the earlier you do it, the easier it is, but it is absolutely doable with motivation and commitment.
I'm so glad that you're talking about motivation and commitment because we have a great question. This is from Brian, and he says, my church plans to start a small classical academy in our church building, starting with grades 1 to 3. We don't have a gym or changing rooms. We just have the sanctuary, back room, and basement. And what you can't see about the rest of the question is there is a park relatively nearby. What could we realistically do to integrate PE? That's his question.
Well, if you can get outside, that's awesome, especially a park. Parkour came from George Hubert, classical PE instructor, military site in France 100 years ago. If you've seen those guys and ladies, jumping over park benches and kind of going up a tree like a cat and things like that. I've had a little bit of that training too. You take your environment and you figure out what you can play on. And so it can be a table, it can be a bench, it can be a boulder, it could be jumping over a little creek or a stick, or, just go out and be creative. And I mean, keep it really simple, just getting the kids to do some movement it's challenging, but it's not overwhelming. And one of the questions on this little primer that you guys gave me before the show was like a turnaround story, something you've witnessed that changes a student's life. And this kind of ties into that because the obese children in my PE classes are oftentimes the biggest fans of PE. And it's because psychologically they're set up to succeed. And this ties into a psychological behavioral term called self-efficacy. It's your perceived chance of success. And with high risk kids, I've worked with high risk like gang kids and things like that too. They need about a 90% chance of success in their mind before they even make an attempt. So if you take an obese child that's physically illiterate, they don't feel good about their body in kinesthetic motion. They don't have confidence. It doesn't feel good. They're awkward. You almost have to guarantee they're going to be successful, but you don't want to make it too easy because people do like to kind of reach up, and or we used to reach up for something higher. And that ties into Greek arete, which means striving for excellence. You're always reaching for something higher. And we'll never be truly excellent because we're humans and we're imperfect. But the Greek ideal was that we're always reaching for it. So you set them up at the park with obstacles and things that won't humiliate them or injure them. There's always a chance you could be hurt, but you're reasonable about it. And then they can get those little pieces of success. And it's amazing how fast you can build their enthusiasm for PE and movement when you set it up that way. I know I've watched this over the years, and they love PE. They know I'm not going to set them up to fail and be humiliated. You got to get really good at scaling too. When you're working with a group of kids, you're going to have kids in there that might play year-round sports, and they live in the country and they're chopping wood in the weekend, like in Oklahoma. I mean, I got kids on ATVs. A lot of them get hurt too. They're at the lake and the boats. They're chopping wood. They're hunting deer. And like one of my third grade girls, first year I was at her, she goes, "Coach Jones, I got a buck." I go, "You did?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Is that your first one?" "No, my second." And she's like third grade. I mean, she's hunting, tracking with her dad in the woods. I mean, you got kids like that, and then you have kids that sit and they do hardly nothing. So you have to scale a lot. Everybody's going to do the same thing, but at a different level, and it's okay. And everybody helps everybody. So I hope that makes sense to people.
I would say if you have to be inside because of the weather, you can set up the sensory hallways where the kids are going to do almost hopscotch, or they're going to do wall push-ups. And you can find tons of videos on YouTube about this, different ideas of things to do in the hallway. And it's not just for the elementary kids. Then you can move your rooms around a little bit. There's all kinds of, look for exercises you can do with a chair. If it's the church and you guys have free reign at the church, start raising money and building your own equipment. That Ron has plans for things that you can build out of like pipes and plumbing equipment. You can build your own equipment get some dads out there and do some simple things, swings and pull-up bars and monkey bars, and then have a big bucket full of jump ropes, and you can make some simple things out of PVC pipe. Like, get creative. There's all kinds of things you can do.
Yeah. A lot of people know me for the movie, The Motivation Factor, about La Sierra High PE. And I was doing some work with actually a Christian school up in Northern California, a small one. And I went up there and did my classical PE presentation. The parents showed up, a very nice crowd, and they got a lot of ideas. And then they had me come back up to do a little more consulting with them about a year and a half later. And I was shocked what they did. The men in the church and the school got together, and they started welding and building stuff, and it looked like La Sierra High School back in the 1960s. It was incredible what they built just based on the film and the presentation I gave. And like Angelique said, there's some sources. Bonnie Pruden's family fitness book has a bunch of schematic plans in there on how to build stuff with measurements. And Bonnie Pruden was just excellent at home exercise and family fitness. And she shared all her plans, never copyrighted any of it. She just put it in her books for free. And so I'll make sure that you have some of those links too. But it doesn't take a lot. I built straight pull-up bars out of 3/4 diameter galvanized pipe. You get a couple of flanges, There's 4 bolts that go up into a header beam. You've got a like an 8-inch pup that comes down, and then a 90, and then you got they come 4 foot sections, and that thing is so solid. You put lag bolts in there in a proper beam, and it's not going anywhere. It's not breaking. I don't care what the weight of the child is on that. It's not going to budge. So there are some things you can do at home. A straight bar is, you can't beat a straight bar. I mean, there's just so much you can do with that. And you can also hang stuff up bars. So if you think of a TRX trainer, it's a webbing kind of a trainer that, it kind of looks like you're skiing behind a boat, but you're holding these handles, and now you can do a deeper squat without worrying about losing your balance, because a lot of kids don't have good balance and kinesthetic awareness. So you can do lunging and squatting with an assist. And you can also, lean into it and do some gravity training, like you're kind of dangling off of it with the strap behind you and you're stretching. So there's all kinds of things to do with like a TRX unit, and you can make your own, but it's kind of a nice system. It's adjustable, and you got padded handles and things like that. So there's a lot you can do at home, and not a lot of space. I had a soldier once in it was during our Iraqi freedom, and she emailed me and said, I've got to train for a fitness assessment for a promotion, and I don't have a lot of space. And I said, well, how much space do you have? And I think if I recall, she said 8 feet by 8 feet. Because to go outside, I didn't realize this, you had to put on all your flak jacket and all it, and it took like 20 minutes to get all her stuff on to go outside, and then she might get shot. It doesn't take a lot of, so, and we worked on it together. It doesn't take a lot of space to do simple body weight exercises and use some simple tools.
So let's talk lesson plans really quickly, because, these educators, we like a good plan. And so you've given us a lot of amazing resources and ideas. Can you give us a sense of, like, if you designated 20, 30 minutes of your homeschool morning to that, or school morning, wherever you are, is there a particular sequence or rhythm that you recommend, like on the ground, off the ground, or give us a little peek into what a rhythm and a routine would look like, either weekly or even daily?
I'm pretty creative. I kind of do things on the fly a lot, but I've also been studying this like 30 years. But if you wanted to simplify it, if you start with some kind of neurological cross-body, cross-lateral pattern, um, it's postural related, it's breathing related, that you can't go wrong with that. There are 3 basic areas of physical fitness. You've got cardiovascular, strength, and then flexibility. And I like to add mobility behind flexibility, because um, mobility is free movement around a joint. And so I'm really big on that, because you can take a person that is not very strong and is really overweight and doesn't move well. And if you just loosen them up a little bit, the old term would be called limbering them up, um, they'll start to move well enough to be able to do other things that are at a higher level of fitness. But if you're really stiff, and by the way, your joints lubricate with movement. When they move, synovial fluid secretes out of the joint, and it lubricates the joint so it doesn't wear itself out. So if you sit around a lot, you're literally drying up. So the joint mobility part, and I do, like, even with my athletes, I do a little dynamic warm up. I teach that with, it's about 5 minutes, and there's no static stretching whatsoever. It's all just twisty, turny, lunging, reaching, and a lot of the things that I do in that routine are based off of classical movements that I learned over the years, and I just kind of put them all together in about a 5-minute routine. This is what I use for the oil company. They asked me to put something together that would help them decrease injuries, and I'm like, oh, I could do that. And I asked, well, how long do I have? They go 5 minutes. I'm like, okay. And that's how I got my job, and I stayed 15 years, because it actually worked. It helped reduce injuries and help rehab people when
Great.
they were injured too. So
And
yeah, so neurological stuff to get going, and then look at the three main areas. You can do some cardio, you can do some body weight strength, and some stretching. It could be static stretching, it could be movement stretching, it could be yoga. There's a lot of different ways to do it. That's that's a real simple way to look at it.
Yeah, I love those categories. Very helpful. Angelique, do you have anything to add?
I would encourage people to look for those Bonnie Pruden books because there's the Klaus Weber test, the great starting point. I did this with my family years ago. And then there's all kinds of exercises that you can use that as a curriculum, basically, to put things together based on your family's needs.
Yeah, bonniepruden.com is the website. I believe it's bonniepruden.com. And my mentor is Enid Whitaker. She's 86, one of my mentors. I have more than one. And she was Bonnie Pruden's assistant for 40 years. They went all over the world teaching, coaching, and she still runs the business part of it. She has an excellent blog that she writes. You need to get on that and just go back through her archives because all the things that we've been talking about tonight, she's been there and done that. And she's really big on really quality PE for girls because in her era, the girls didn't do what the boys got to do, and they were oftentimes kind of, pushed aside. And so she's got a real girl focus with a lot of her articles because she knows that they're capable and they deserve the same opportunities. So, um, excellent resource. In fact, I just talked to her the other day. And Angelique, I've got about 15 different videos that I've shot with her over the last couple years that I haven't put up yet. And so I told her this week I was going to start getting those published. But there's going to be a lot of interviews with her on a lot of the topics we talked about tonight. Um, it'd be good for you guys to check that out too.
We're down to just our last few minutes, so I want to be sure to give you an opportunity. Like, what do you want to emphasize? What do you want families to go out on? And if you could weave into that, I think all of us feel compelled, persuaded. But if maybe we don't have children who are so compelled or persuaded, if you have any little tips for getting our dear ones on board, um, we're all ears.
I'll go. I mean, I think just getting people to move is a first step, but then you want to think about moving well because the problem with just moving more, if you don't have the chops, then you end up getting hurt, whether it's an adult or a child. So getting people to get behind the philosophy of classical, from my perspective, classical PE, the philosophy comes first. Why are we doing it? Like, why is it important? If you watch the Motivation Factor, our PE documentary, you're going to get a lot of what I think you're looking for. And you're going to realize, like, oh my gosh, like this is super important for learning. It's not really a PE film, it's more of an education film. And in a lot of ways, it's a cultural film and how to build good citizens and just make the world a better place. But you have to have, I've talked about lens tonight, developing that lens to see things differently. Because the PE that people know today isn't even worth doing. You might as well just let the kids go out and play in the monkey bars. I mean, it at least in public schools, it's not even worth the salary of the so-called teacher. But I'm not talking about that kind of PE, nor do I teach that. This is the real stuff, or at least the 2025 version. So that would be my recommendation. Like, why are we doing it? Get behind the philosophy. It's an intellectual approach, but that's what homeschooling is about. You take a deeper look at things and you have family discussions and you physically educate your kids. That's how it's done. So
Watch the Motivation Factor, get an
Yes.
education. Angelique, what do you want parents to know?
Well, I would definitely say watch the Motivation Factor, and I put the link in the chat. But there's also, we'll get you the link to the Renaissance, which is a little 6-minute video that is amazing. But I would say accountability is the big thing. So, in your lesson plans, you need to be putting in there, we're going to do this on this day and this on this day. But find other people to do this with because it is an easy thing to let go. When you're not in the habit or you're tired or whatever, it can be really easy or the weather's bad or whatever. Every February, I give a February pep talk to my parents and my Reading Foundations classes, and kids and parents alike are climbing the walls, especially depending on where you live in the country. So get a regular group together that you meet up together at the local church gym. Maybe it's not your church, but somebody has a church that has some space where you can do this. Or all go join the Y together, or get a day pass to the Y. But absolutely find accountability. Do this together. Everybody start watching these videos. I'll watch these and you watch these, and then make it like book club, moms. Like, you get together and you discuss this and start digging in, and Ron's a resource, I'm a resource, but start putting these pieces together and hold each other accountable when you don't feel like doing it, even if you're just doing it for 10 minutes, and come out with, what can I do at home when the weather's bad, in the hallway or in the living room, or the kids can do in their bedroom? Like, we had a indoor pull-up bar that went in a door frame, and it stayed in Big Brother's room, and he just knew that at different points in the day, he had agreed to it, different people are going to be coming in and using that pull-up bar in his room. Or we have in the winter, we hang a climbing rope from the ceiling in our basement, and then the kids would make an obstacle course in the basement. We had Mimi bought us wrestling mats one Christmas, and then she bought us more wrestling mats the following Christmas so that Mom would not pull her hair out with all of these boys. And we had a little mini tramp, and we would have all these stations set up, and they would have to go up the stairs and down the stairs, and they're crawling the stairs, the crab crawl and whatever. And that's how we survived. So you can do it. You can be creative. There's all kinds of
Yeah,
fun
and
stuff.
from a whole learning standpoint, we go back to labor engineering, like the math, the science, the arts involved in making your own equipment. Something else I learned along the way is that when you put your hands on the maintenance and creation of your own gear, you have a completely different respect for what it represents. And this is something that's really missing today because people so often just buy stuff, and the kids don't have an appreciation for what it takes to put it together. There's a lot of lessons that you can learn neurologically from how do you use a saw and a screwdriver and a drill. I mean, and if you follow somebody like Mike Rowe, like, there's this crisis with tradesmen, they're like AI taking over a lot of computer jobs, and we don't have enough plumbers, and they make great money. I came from blue collar originally. I spent over 10 years in the oil fields and construction business before I went back to school. So um, I have that side and appreciation for manual labor. It teaches you a lot how to work with your hands and your body. It's super important.
Amen, amen. And Scholar Academy has common arts classes where your children can practice the common arts as well. So Ron and Angelique, thank you so much. I know that everyone is going away with very practical and inspired action steps to take. I personally feel like, the Lord has been telling me I need to do my stretches before I get on the computer in the morning. I feel it. I think all of us recognize that we have to incorporate, especially in our modern contemporary world and life, we have to intentionally incorporate natural ways of being in the world and do it intentionally, because the way we are living now, there's so much that's unnatural about it. So I'm so glad that we were able to spend this evening together. So grateful for the myriad of resources you have supplied. And don't you worry, participants, guests, if you're like, oh, but I didn't catch that link, or I'm not sure about this, or I want to hear this again, just wait for it. We're going to send you the recording, and it will have a host of links as well. You can reach out to us at support@scolaacademy.com if you have further questions or follow-up questions. And if you want to follow Ron, you can get on his YouTube channel. You can get familiar with the resources that he offers. If you want your child to actually enroll in classes with Angelique, where she will coach you and them through these processes and develop their reading skills, she's teaching classes all the way up even through the 5th and 6th grade. So check out the Scholar Academy website, scolaacademy.com, and see what's available there. We're here to support you, and we're so grateful that you're all with us in this classical renewal whole self, the whole body. So thank you again, Ron and Angelique. We're so
Thanks for the
grateful
great
for all.
questions. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it, everyone.
Loved it. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great evening. Good night.
Good night.